I remember that evening like it was ordinary, like it was just another Sunday, the kind where nothing ever happens, and yet, somehow, the air feels heavier than usual. The sun was starting to dip, spilling gold through the sheer curtains of my wife's family home, the kind of light that makes everything look softer, almost forgiving. You'd think soft light like that would calm you, but there was a subtle weight in the room, a quiet tension I didn't even notice until later. The house itself was breathtaking, the kind of space where every corner tells a story of wealth and taste. High ceilings, polished floors, furniture that looked like it had been curated by someone with more money than sense. I always admired it, but sometimes it made me feel like I was walking through a museum rather than a home. Still, it was familiar, and familiarity breeds comfort. Or at least, that's what I told myself as I stepped into the dining room. My cousin was there, of course. He had this charm that made people lean in, laugh a little louder, hang on his every word. He wore confidence like it was a second skin, and there was a subtle smugness in the way he carried himself, like he knew more than he let on. At that point, I didn't question it. I liked him well enough. He was family, but something about the way he laughed at his own jokes, with just a hint too much satisfaction, made a tiny spark of suspicion flicker somewhere deep in my mind. I pushed it aside. Family gatherings are supposed to be about laughter, about stories, about the easy comfort of shared history. We were seated around the massive dining table, the kind that could swallow an entire football team and still have room to spare. Glasses clinked. Plates were passed. The aroma of roasted chicken, fresh herbs, and warm bread filled the air, mingling with the faint scent of polished wood and the delicate perfume of the flowers on the center table. I caught my wife's hand under the table, her thumb brushing mine in that quiet, reassuring way that says everything is fine even when nothing really is. Conversations ebbed and flowed, laughter spilling over in bursts. Cousin was in the middle of a story, something ridiculous about a road trip gone wrong, punctuated with animated gestures and exaggerated expressions. People laughed, and I laughed too, genuinely. And yet, there was this small, nagging feeling, like a fly buzzing just at the edge of my awareness. Something about his tone, the way he described money casually, the subtle emphasis he placed on who paid for what, it didn't quite sit right with me. But I shook it off. Maybe it was just me being paranoid. Maybe I was reading too much into the easy charm that always seemed to precede trouble. That I remember stealing a glance at him while he talked. The way he leaned back, that confident smirk, the slight glint in his eye when he mentioned expensive restaurants, exclusive clubs, trips he had taken with barely a second thought. I told myself I was overthinking it. He's family, after all. People exaggerate sometimes. People brag. But even as I thought that, there was a part of me that stayed alert, a tiny voice whispering, "Watch him." Outside, the sun continued to dip, and the first shadows stretched across the floor, brushing the edges of the furniture. Light flickered on the polished surfaces, reflecting briefly in the gold trim of picture frames. I caught a fleeting memory from years ago, of simpler gatherings in smaller, less extravagant houses, laughing, carefree, unaware of the burdens that money and ambition would one day place on the people in the room. There was comfort in remembering that, but also a bittersweet ache. Life was simpler then. People were simpler then. Dinner wound down, and the chatter became softer, more intimate. People leaned in, sharing small secrets, inside jokes, gentle teasing. I noticed my cousin leaning slightly closer to my wife as she laughed at something. He said, the kind of closeness that's innocent enough but leaves you thinking about boundaries. I felt a twinge, an unfamiliar, tiny tension curling up my spine. But again, I told myself it was nothing. Just perception, paranoia. After dessert, we moved to the living room. Glasses of wine in hand, soft music playing in the background, laughter mixing with the low hum of conversation. The sunlight had faded entirely now, leaving only the warm glow of lamps and the flicker of candles. I watched my cousin from across the room, his easy charm never faltering, his smile still sharp and confident. I couldn't pinpoint why, but I felt my heart rate quicken just a touch. That subtle prelude to a storm you don't yet see coming. It's funny how ordinary moments can carry the seeds of everything that follows. I didn't know then that the casual confidence of a cousin, the laughter, the light, the warmth of an evening spent surrounded by family, how all of that could be the stage for suspicion, for betrayal, for heartbreak. I didn't know that beneath that easy charm, beneath the familiar laughter, something much darker, much more complicated, was quietly waiting to reveal itself. And yet, in that moment, I sat there, smiling, laughing, telling myself that everything was fine. The air smelled of roasted chicken and candles. The room shimmered with golden light, and the world felt calm. Just calm enough to lull you into a false sense of security. It started subtly, almost laughably small, the kind of thing you notice only after you've been burned by assumption once or twice in your life. At first, it was just the way my cousin asked questions, not directly, not in a way that would make anyone suspicious, but the kind that lingers in the mind afterward. "So, how's your family doing financially these days?" he asked casually one evening, as if asking about the weather. My stomach nodded for no reason I could name. I laughed it off, forcing a chuckle that probably sounded too sharp. "What are you thinking?" I told myself. "It's just curiosity. Stop overthinking it." But the words lingered, curling around the edges of my mind like smoke you can't quite blow away. There was something about the casual way he said it, the way he tilted his head slightly, as if testing a theory no one else could see, that I remember glancing at my wife at the time. She didn't notice anything, of course. She never did. Her trust was a wide, open thing, the kind that made people take liberties they shouldn't. I admired that in her. And maybe that's what made me uneasy. My instincts were sharper, or, at least, they tried to be, because I couldn't help thinking about what people might do when the stakes were high. And, well, the stakes were always high with her family. Billionaire level high. There was a flashback that hit me suddenly, unbidden, while I watched him pour himself a drink in the kitchen that night. Years ago, when I was younger, my cousin had borrowed money from me, something small, a few $100s, and never mentioned paying it back. Not directly, at least. He had a way of making it sound like it wasn't really owed, like the world somehow owed him instead. I'd laughed then, dismissing it as a minor thing, a quirk. And yet now, in the quiet glow of that kitchen, I felt the old unease coil in my stomach again. He lingered there, leaning against the counter, that familiar self-satisfied grin curling over his lips. I caught myself watching the way his fingers drummed lightly against the glass, subtle but deliberate. Small gestures, but to me they suddenly screamed something I wasn't ready to admit yet. This is calculated. I tried to push the thought away. Maybe I was imagining it. Maybe it was paranoia. Over the next few days, the unease grew. Little things I had brushed off before began to take on weight. A phone buzzing when he thought no one was looking. The way he casually mentioned investments in passing, then laughed it off when I looked too closely. The way he lingered over certain rooms in my wife's family estate, his eyes scanning, noting, cataloging. I hated myself for noticing these things, for letting suspicion creep in, but I couldn't help it. Instinct, I told myself. Call it instinct. There was another flashback, softer this time, warmer but tinged with that creeping sense of premonition. I remembered our last family camping trip, years ago, when he had accidentally found the envelope I'd hidden with some cash. He hadn't taken it, not that I could prove, but I remember the way he looked at me afterward, amused, almost triumphant. I had dismissed it as coincidence then. Now, I wondered how many other little coincidences had happened under my nose. That it was subtle, small glances, slightly offhand remarks. But suddenly, nothing felt small anymore. Everything he said, everything he did, seemed layered with meaning. The man I'd laughed with, the cousin I had trusted, was no longer a simple presence in the room. He was a puzzle, a question mark, and worst of all, he was capable of slipping past my defenses without me noticing. That I caught myself staring at him during another family dinner, a silent observer to a performance I hadn't realized was happening. He joked about mundane things, about work, travel, and minor mishaps, but there was a rhythm to it, a cadence that felt rehearsed. My mind began tracing every little movement, analyzing the laughter, the pauses, the emphasis on words that didn't need emphasis. Is he trying to see how much I know? Or is he testing me? I didn't know, but the thought refused to leave. By the time we were alone later that night, the house quiet except for the hum of the air conditioner and the occasional distant sound of a car passing outside, I felt the weight of that unease settle deep in my chest. I replayed every interaction, every word, searching for patterns, looking for a reason to dismiss my suspicions. But there was none. Only a creeping sense of caution I hadn't felt in years, the kind that makes you check your phone twice, listen for footsteps that aren't there, analyze a smile for hidden meanings. That I poured myself a drink, sat by the window, and let the cool night air drift in, carrying with it the faint scent of rain on asphalt. I told myself I was imagining things, that paranoia was poisoning my thoughts. But deep down, I knew better. Something was off, and I didn't know what yet. I just knew the calm of our world, the laughter, the golden light, the familiar comfort, was beginning to fracture. And the most dangerous part? I wasn't ready to confront it. I wasn't ready to believe it. Not yet. But the whisper of suspicion had arrived, quiet, almost polite, and it would not leave. That it hit me the next week, like a whisper that suddenly feels like a scream. I heard it first from one of the staff, just a passing comment, a careless word, dropped in conversation while I was pouring myself a late-night drink. "You know your cousin's been asking a lot of questions about the family trust, right?" the housekeeper said, almost laughing it off, like it wasn't a big deal. But to me, it was the kind of thing that sets off alarms. My heart thudded in my chest like a warning drumbeat, and I froze mid-sipped a tea. First, I told myself it was nonsense. "He's curious. That's all," I muttered under my breath, trying to convince myself. But the seed had been planted. Once the idea of my cousin prying into finances took root, it spread like wildfire in my mind, consuming every casual memory, every moment of laughter we'd shared over the years. I began to replay conversations, analyze his laughter, scrutinize his tone. Nothing seemed innocent anymore. That I remembered another flashback, vivid and almost painful in its clarity. Years ago, he had casually mentioned how easy it would be to get rich if you knew the right people. Back then, I laughed, brushing it off as idle chatter from someone always chasing shortcuts. Now, the memory felt ominous, like a warning I'd ignored. The joke wasn't a joke. It was a blueprint, hidden in plain sight. The next few days were filled with little signs, tiny, almost imperceptible gestures that suddenly felt loaded. He lingered a little too long in rooms he had no reason to enter. His phone buzzed constantly, and he would check it quickly, surreptitiously, as if hiding messages from the rest of us. Sometimes, when he thought no one was looking, I caught a flash of that sly smile, the one that never belonged to the cousin I thought I knew, the one that suggested schemes and plans I couldn't yet imagine. And then came the rumor, the one that solidified my growing paranoia. I heard it whispered among family friends, those peripheral voices who never realized I was listening. "Have you noticed how interested he's become in the family assets? Something's off." That was all it took. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach, a mixture of dread and disbelief. Could he really be planning something? Could he really betray us like that? The same family we laughed with, the same family who had welcomed him into every home, every heart. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Late at night, when the house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the floorboards, I would replay every interaction, every word, every smile. There was always a reason to doubt, even if it was buried beneath years of shared memories. And yet, every memory suddenly felt suspicious. The way he had asked about my wife's father's business trips, the way he seemed to casually notice every new investment, every new addition to the family estate. A flashback hit me unexpectedly. I remembered the last family vacation we took together, the beach trip where he had disappeared for hours, claiming to explore the town. At the time, I didn't think twice about it. He had always been a wanderer, a free spirit. But now, in the cold glow of my living room, it felt calculated. Every small absence, every moment of curiosity, every joke that hid a question beneath it, all of it suddenly had weight. I found myself questioning everything about him, about us, about trust. Was I imagining it? Or was I finally seeing the truth? The thought gnawed at me, relentless, until I couldn't escape it. I became hyper-aware, noticing the subtle ways he moved through the room, the way he leaned over to whisper to someone else, the way he laughed a little too easily at certain remarks. Each gesture felt like a clue, each glance a potential confirmation. I remember pacing the house that night, the floor cool beneath my feet, the shadows of the furniture stretching long under the warm glow of the lamps. I tried to tell myself that maybe it was nothing, that maybe I was letting paranoia get the better of me. But then I thought about my wife, about her family, about everything they had built. The wealth, the trust, the delicate balance of loyalty that holds people together. And I realized I couldn't take chances. Not anymore. Not with this much. At stake. It was a cruel kind of clarity. Suddenly, the laughter, the charm, the easygoing conversations, all of it felt like a stage, a carefully constructed performance. And I was watching, a quiet observer, trying to separate truth from illusion, motive from coincidence. Every casual remark about investments, every sly comment about trips or gifts, every lingering smile, it all added up. And in that quiet moment, I began to understand just how easy it could be to misread someone. Or maybe how easy it could be to see the truth hiding in plain sight. I don't know when exactly the shift happened, the moment when suspicion crossed the line into certainty. But by the time I went to bed that night, the whisper had grown louder, more insistent. It was no longer a subtle doubt. It was a warning, a quiet alarm screaming beneath the surface of everyday life. I felt the weight of it pressing down on my chest, making sleep impossible, making silence unbearable. Something was coming. I didn't know what, but I knew, without question, that it was going to change everything. The first real signs came in ways I wasn't ready for. Small things. At first, barely noticeable if you weren't paying attention. But once you see them, once that seed of suspicion has been planted, everything starts to feel like it's part of a bigger picture. A picture that you don't want to admit is forming. It started with late-night calls. He would excuse himself from dinner, claiming he needed to check on work or respond to an urgent message. I remember standing in the hallway, hearing the faint buzz of his phone against his hand. There was nothing overt, nothing concrete, but my chest tightened anyway. Something about the secrecy felt deliberate. I hated feeling paranoid, hated letting myself think that family could act like strangers hiding behind doors. But I couldn't shake it. Then there were the little inconsistencies. I'd ask him casually about his day, and he'd pause too long, shuffle words awkwardly, or deflect with a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. A few times, I caught him glancing over at documents, left carelessly on a table, eyes lingering just a little too long on spreadsheets, contracts, even invoices. Things he had no reason to care about. Or at least, things he shouldn't have cared about. I remember a flashback from years ago, a moment that seemed trivial at the time, but now felt loaded. We were in a small cafe downtown, and he had subtly slid his hand over my wallet while we laughed. I didn't notice, or maybe I did, and chose not to care. It was a joke then, harmless, playful. But in the quiet reflection of that night, I realized those small, calculated gestures were his language. A way to test boundaries, to see what he could get away with. The tipping point came during a family dinner. My wife's father had left some important papers on the dining table, financial statements, estate plans, things that should have been secure. I saw him glance at them, a quick flicker of curiosity in his eyes that lingered longer than polite interest should allow. I felt something tighten in my stomach, a mix of dread and disbelief. No, I told myself. You're imagining this. He wouldn't, would he? And yet, the doubt gnawed at me. I noticed how he had started keeping his phone close, how his smile sometimes didn't reach the warmth it once had, how he avoided answering questions directly. The charm, the laughter, the easy confidence, all of it began to feel like a carefully crafted mask. I hated that I was seeing him this way, but I couldn't stop. My instincts had sharpened, and the subtle signs were no longer subtle. They were shouting. There was a flashback from my childhood that sneaked in while I sat in the quiet of my study later that night. I remembered when he had taken my favorite comic book, pretending he was borrowing it, only for it to disappear for weeks. Back then, it was a minor annoyance, something I laughed off. Now, it felt like a warning I'd ignored, like the first chapter of a story I hadn't realized I was reading. That I started watching him more closely, analyzing every move. The way he leaned over to talk to my wife about trivial things. The way he lingered near the safe, asking questions about household routines. The way he laughed at jokes with a slightly too knowing glint in his eye. Every small act added to the growing suspicion, and I began to feel a cold, creeping weight in my chest. A sense of impending betrayal that made my hands shake, sometimes unconsciously. One night, I followed him quietly, not out of malice, but because I couldn't help it. I needed to know. He went to the study, and I watched from the doorway, hidden in shadow. He didn't steal anything, at least not yet, but the way he lingered over the desk, the papers, the files, it was deliberate. I could almost feel his mind calculating, weighing possibilities, considering what he could take and how. I stepped back, heart hammering, realizing that suspicion had turned into something more tangible: fear. Fear of losing the trust of everyone I loved. Fear of being betrayed by someone I had called family. I remember the feeling vividly. The cold steel of the doorknob in my hand, the faint hum of the refrigerator behind me, the soft creak of the floorboards under my weight. I wanted to confront him, to demand an explanation, but I hesitated. Part of me feared the truth. Part of me feared what he would do if confronted. And part of me, the part that remembered all those small childhood moments, still wanted to believe in him. By the end of that night, everything had shifted. The laughter, the charm, the casual conversations, they all carried a shadow now. I was hyper-aware, reading motives where there might be none, analyzing expressions, overthinking gestures. But it didn't feel like overthinking anymore. It felt like survival. I had to know, and I had to protect the family, even if it meant doubting someone I had loved and trusted. And in the quiet moments, sitting alone in the dim light of my study, I couldn't help but ask myself, what is he capable of? How far would he go if he wanted it? The thought alone sent a shiver down my spine. The first real taste of heartbreak wrapped in the cold, sharp edges of betrayal that I knew it was coming sooner or later, the confrontation. That sense of inevitability was suffocating, like standing at the edge of a cliff and knowing that if you take one step, everything will change. I tried to delay it, tried to convince myself that maybe I was overreacting, that maybe it was paranoia talking again. But the signs, the whispers, the lingering suspicion, they wouldn't let me. Not anymore. It started one evening after dinner. The house was quiet except for the soft hum of the ceiling fan and the occasional creak of the floorboards as someone walked past in another room. My cousin and I were in the study, and I could feel the tension thick in the air. I don't even remember who spoke first, but the words that came out of my mouth carried the weight of everything I'd been holding inside. "Look, we need to talk," I said, my voice low, careful, but unsteady. He looked up, startled, for just a moment. Then that familiar confident smile slid across his face, like nothing I said could unbalance him. But I noticed the slight twitch at the corner of his eye, a tiny fissure in the armor he always wore. I hated myself for noticing it. I hated that I cared this much. But I couldn't let it go. Not with what was at stake. "I've noticed some things," I continued, forcing myself to stay calm. "Some inconsistencies. Questions you've asked, the way you linger around certain documents, your late-night calls." My voice cracked. For a second, betraying the fear and anger simmering beneath the surface. I swallowed hard, trying to regain composure. "I need to know what's going on." For a moment, silence. Heavy, suffocating silence that made the room feel smaller, the walls closer. I could feel my own heartbeat, loud and jagged in my ears, echoing off the polished floors. I wanted to reach out, to shake him, to demand honesty. But I also wanted to step back, to leave, to pretend none of this had ever happened. I hated the tension, but I also hated myself for doubting him. He leaned back in the chair, his smile fading just slightly. "What do you mean?" he asked, voice casual, but with an edge I couldn't ignore. "I don't know what you're talking about." That's when I realized. He was skilled at this, at deflecting, at masking anything beneath layers of charm and nonchalance. But I wasn't about to be fooled. Not this time. I remembered a flashback. One of those small moments that suddenly feels like a prophecy. Years ago, he had taken advantage of a small opportunity at my expense. A borrowed item, a minor deception, and I had laughed it off. I had dismissed it. I had trusted him. And now, I felt that old pang of betrayal mixing with something sharper, something more urgent. "I can't dismiss this anymore," I thought. "I'm not accusing you," I said, even though every fiber of me wanted to scream otherwise. "But you need to be honest. If there's something you're involved in, if you've done something, anything, tell me now." My hands were clenched at my sides, and I could feel the tension in my shoulders, in my jaw. I was bracing for impact, for the moment when truth or lies would shatter everything I thought I knew. He laughed. Not a full, hearty laugh, but a short, nervous chuckle, like someone caught off guard but trying to maintain composure. "You're imagining things," he said. And for a split second, I wanted to believe him. I wanted to breathe again. But the way he avoided my gaze, the way his hands twitched slightly as they rested on the desk, told me otherwise. There was something there, something unspoken, and it terrified me that I could feel the anger rising, coiling in my chest like a living thing. Not just at him, but at myself for letting it get this far, for letting suspicion fester until it became a roaring fire. I wanted to slam my hands on the table, to demand answers, to shake the truth out of him. But I restrained myself. I had to. I needed clarity, not confrontation fueled by uncontrolled emotion. There was another flashback, this one sharper, almost cruel. I remembered the first time I had caught him in a minor lie, the way he had twisted the truth so easily, like it was nothing, like it was art. I had been impressed then, or maybe just naive. Now, I felt sickened by the memory. The same cleverness that had made me laugh and admire him was now a weapon I feared he might wield against everything I cared about. We sat there for what felt like hours, though it was probably only minutes. The tension stretched between us, heavy and tangible. I realized then that confrontation wasn't just about uncovering truth. It was about facing your own fear, your own doubts, your own capacity for anger and disappointment. It was about staring into the possibility that someone you love could hurt you, even without meaning to, even without realizing it. By the time I left the study that night, nothing had been resolved. But something had shifted. The veneer of normalcy, of easy charm and casual laughter, had cracked. I was no longer the naive cousin, no longer the passive observer. I was alert, wary, prepared for whatever came next. The confrontation had begun, not with words, but with recognition, recognition of betrayal, or the possibility of it, lurking just beneath the surface. And that recognition, heavy and unyielding, was a storm waiting to break. The heartbreak didn't arrive all at once. It crept in, quiet and patient, like the shadows stretching across the walls as the sun disappeared behind the city skyline. At first, it was subtle, a pang in the chest, a whisper of doubt, but soon it became impossible to ignore. The confrontation had opened a door I wasn't sure I wanted to walk through. And once it was open, there was no going back. I kept replaying the night over and over in my head. Every word, every glance, every gesture. Maybe I had been too quick to assume. Maybe I had been blinded by fear. That thought alone was almost unbearable. To suspect someone you love, someone you've trusted for years, is like holding a fragile glass in your hands, knowing that even the slightest shake could shatter it. And the worst part? I wasn't sure whether the glass was already cracked or if I was the one pressing too hard. There was a flashback, one of those painful little memories that pierce you like a knife. My cousin had once stayed up all night helping me with a personal project, laughing and joking, genuinely invested in seeing me succeed. I remembered feeling gratitude, relief, and even admiration. And now, as I sat in the quiet of the living room, I realized how easily my mind had rewritten those moments, twisting them into signs, hints of deceit. The betrayal I feared might not exist, but the guilt of doubting him was real, heavy, suffocating. I found myself wandering the house aimlessly that night, the floors cold beneath my feet, the soft hum of the heater filling the silence. Every room held memories of laughter, of family, of trust. And yet, each one felt tainted, as if the walls themselves knew that something had shifted. I caught glimpses of myself in mirrors, tired, worn, eyes shadowed by sleepless nights, and wondered how long it had been since I had truly felt at ease. And then came the realization that cut the deepest. Maybe the person I feared wasn't the enemy. Maybe the enemy was my own mind, my own assumptions, my own inability to reconcile love with suspicion. The thought was dizzying. It made my hands shake. It made me want to sink to the floor and disappear into the quiet, into the darkness that felt safer than facing the tangled mess of emotions I was now swimming in. I remembered another flashback, this one so vivid it made my chest ache. A simple day, nothing extraordinary. He had fixed a leak in my car, laughing at my incompetence, joking as he wiped grease from his hands. I had felt relief, a quiet appreciation for his presence, for his care. And now, every gesture, every act of kindness, seemed tinged with the weight of my doubt. Could I trust any of it? Could I trust him at all? I sat by the window that night, the city lights spilling onto the floor like shards of gold. Rain had begun to fall, soft at first, then heavier, drumming against the glass in a rhythm that matched my heartbeat. I let myself remember the laughter, the moments of genuine care, and felt a sharp twist of grief. Grief for the innocence I had lost. Grief for the trust one had questioned. Grief for the possibility that I had misread everything, yet couldn't escape the shadow of doubt. And yet, even amidst the heartbreak, there was clarity. I realized that suspicion, even if justified, comes at a cost. It eats at you, corrodes the edges of relationships, and leaves you hollow if you let it. I understood then that I couldn't move forward until I had seen the full picture, until I had separated truth from fear, until I had faced both my cousin and myself with honesty. There was a sharp pang of vulnerability in that understanding. I had allowed myself to be consumed by fear, by what-ifs, by shadows of possibility. And now, I had to face the consequences of that fear, the strain it had placed on my heart, the quiet loneliness that came from doubting someone I loved. It was a sobering, almost cruel lesson. Sometimes the hardest betrayals aren't the ones done to you, but the ones you commit in your own mind. By the end of the night, I felt a strange mix of exhaustion and resolve. The heartbreak had left its mark, yes, but it had also opened a path. I couldn't stay trapped in doubt. I couldn't allow the fear of what might be to destroy the trust that had existed before. The next steps were uncertain, the road ahead murky, but I knew one thing. I had to uncover the truth, whatever it might be, and confront it with clarity, not just emotion. And so, as the rain continued to fall and the city slept beneath the night sky, I made a quiet promise to myself. I would seek the truth. I would face the reality of my cousin's actions, or the lack thereof. And I would prepare for whatever heartbreak or relief awaited me on the other side. The days that followed were tense, to put it lightly. I couldn't stop thinking about the possibility of betrayal, but I also couldn't ignore the nagging voice inside that whispered, maybe it's not what you think. It was like walking a tightrope over a canyon, every step weighted with fear and doubt. I had to know. I needed the truth, whatever it might be. I started quietly, almost cautiously, observing. Not in a creepy way. At least, I tried to tell myself it wasn't, but with the kind of attention born from a mixture of suspicion and desperation. I watched how he moved through the house, how he handled small details, how he interacted with my wife's family. There was nothing overt, nothing blatantly incriminating, yet every gesture felt loaded. Every glance, every laugh, every casual remark seemed like a code I was trying to decipher. Late one night, I found myself at the study again. Papers lay scattered across the desk, documents I didn't fully understand but had learned to recognize as important. I noticed some things that had seemed minor before, the way certain envelopes were stacked, how a file had been moved slightly, the faint impression of fingerprints on polished surfaces. Nothing screamed crime, but in my mind, each small anomaly was a breadcrumb leading me deeper into a forest I didn't know if I could escape. I remembered another flashback, one that suddenly felt heavy with meaning. When I was younger, he had always been curious about other people's possessions, poking around in drawers, peeking at notebooks, asking seemingly innocent questions. I had laughed it off as childish curiosity, nothing more. Now, it felt like a pattern repeating itself, a subtle rehearsal for something bigger. My stomach tightened, and I felt the familiar coil of fear tighten in my chest that I started keeping. Notes. Little things I noticed, phrases he used, times he disappeared, subtle shifts in his behavior. I wasn't sure if it was paranoia or detective work, but I couldn't stop. I even found myself analyzing the way he handled money, the way he talked about investments, how casual he was about expensive things. It was meticulous, exhausting, and maddening, but I couldn't stop. I had to know the truth. One evening, while sifting through old family records, things that had been left in boxes, gathering dust, I stumbled upon a clue. A letter, a bank statement, something that seemed completely out of place. My hands shook as I picked it up. The room was silent except for the soft hum of the lamp, and my heart thudded like it was trying to escape my chest. I didn't yet know what it meant, but I felt a surge of adrenaline, half fear, half hope. This is it, I thought. This could tell me everything. Another flashback hit me hard. I remembered the time he had borrowed my father's tools for a weekend project. and returned them neatly, almost too neatly, with a smile that made it impossible to scold him. At the time, I thought it was harmless, charming even. But now, I saw the precision, the calculated ease, the knack for slipping in and out without anyone noticing. It all suddenly made sense. The charm, the confidence, the subtle manipulation of small spaces. Maybe he had been practicing this, testing boundaries, learning how far he could go before anyone noticed. I started putting pieces together, mapping out movements, timelines, and small coincidences that had seemed trivial before. It was like piecing together a puzzle where some of the pieces had been deliberately hidden or altered. The more I uncovered, the heavier the weight on my chest became. And yet, with every piece, I felt closer to the truth and closer to understanding what I had been too afraid to face. The tension was exhausting. Every casual remark he made felt like a test. Every smile, a mask hiding intentions I couldn't yet read. I began to feel the thrill and terror of approaching a truth that might change everything. I had become hyper-aware, watching the way he interacted with others, noting the timing of his movements, the subtleties in his expressions. Each observation added a layer to the story, a layer I was determined to uncover. One night, I found myself staring at my own reflection in the study window. Rain had begun to fall again, the droplets casting fractured reflections across the glass. I barely recognized the person looking back, tired, haunted, obsessively attentive, yet resolute. I realized that the search for truth was as much about me as it was about him. I had to face my own doubts, my own fear, my own willingness to see betrayal where it might not exist, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't turn away. Something was happening behind the surface, something hidden, something that had the potential to ruin everything or prove nothing at all. And I had to see it through, because living in doubt, paralyzed, fearful, heart aching, was no longer an option. By the end of that week, I had collected enough small clues to feel a sense of cautious clarity. I wasn't certain, but I was close. I could see the outline of truth forming, just beyond my reach. And somewhere deep inside, I knew that once I grasped it, everything would change. Forever. I wasn't prepared for the truth. At least I thought. I wasn't. After days of watching, noting, doubting, piecing together what I believed to be a sinister puzzle, the moment of revelation hit me like a punch I never saw coming. And yet, as I stood there, staring at the evidence in front of me, a strange part of me felt almost foolish. It was in the study again. The room dimly lit by the afternoon sun spilling through the blinds, dust motes dancing lazily in the air. I had laid out all the documents I had gathered over the past week, every note, every observation, every small anomaly. My hands were clammy, my stomach tight. I felt a strange mixture of fear, anticipation, and a twisted sense of justice. I was about to confirm what I already feared, and yet, somehow, I didn't want it to be true. I picked up a folder I had overlooked, one that seemed inconsequential at first glance. It was a detailed account ledger, but as I opened it, my eyes widened. My cousin hadn't touched a single thing. Not one account. Not one investment. Everything he had been suspected of, every imagined move, every little act I had read as suspicious. It was completely innocent. Not a hint of manipulation, not a trace of deceit. A flashback hit me like a thunderclap. I remembered the moments I had mistrusted him, the way he had glanced at papers, the little smiles, the slight delays in answering questions. Each memory had been replayed countless times in my mind as evidence of betrayal. And now, in the stark light of truth, I realized I had been wrong. Every one of those moments had been innocent, mundane, or simply the quirks of his personality. I had let fear and suspicion twist reality into something it wasn't. That I could feel my chest loosen, a weight lifting that I hadn't realized was crushing me. Relief washed over me, but it was tangled with embarrassment, guilt, and a flicker of lingering shame. I had doubted him, the family, and even my own judgment. The tension, the late nights, the obsessive note-taking, it had all been for nothing. And yet, I couldn't erase the emotional journey I had just endured. That I walked over to him, who was sitting calmly in the living room, unaware of the storm that had been raging in my mind. His expression was the same as always, relaxed, easygoing, unaware of the doubts that had grown around him like vines. I need to apologize, I said, my voice quieter than I intended, shaky, and raw. I've been foolish. I let suspicion take over. I, I thought. Words failed me. I didn't want to explain the spiral of paranoia that had consumed me. The sleepless nights, the fear, the heartbreak. He looked at me, slightly confused at first, and then that familiar grin appeared, warm, understanding, almost teasing. "It's okay," he said simply. And in that moment, I realized the depth of my own insecurity, the way I had let fear dictate my perception of reality. He hadn't done anything wrong. He never had. The paranoia had been mine all along. Another flashback. Surfaced, soft this time, warm with clarity. I remembered all the times he had genuinely helped, fixing things without being asked, staying up late to support me, lending an ear when no one else would listen. I had read those acts through the lens of suspicion, twisting kindness into cunning. And now, seeing it with fresh eyes, I felt a pang of shame so deep it was almost physical. I sank into a chair across from him, the sunlight falling on the floor between us, and let out a long breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The truth didn't just exonerate him. It freed me from my own fear, from the paranoia that had held me captive. And yet, it left a strange emptiness in its place, a reminder that trust is fragile, easily bent by shadows of doubt. That I remembered the study, the scattered papers, the obsessive notes, the late nights spent tracing imagined trails of deceit. All of it now felt almost theatrical, a story I had created in my mind, fueled by fear and anxiety. I laughed quietly, a little bitter, a little relieved. I had hunted ghosts, only to find that the real danger had been inside me all along. That I reached across the table and gave him a small, tentative smile. "You were never the problem," I said. I, I owe you an apology. A big one." He chuckled softly, a sound so familiar and unthreatening, and shook his head. "It's okay. Really. Just don't let your imagination run wild next time." The relief was profound, almost dizzying. My chest felt lighter, my mind clearer. I could finally breathe again, free from the tension that had gripped me for days, even weeks. The suspicion, the paranoia, the fear, they were gone, replaced by clarity and, strangely, gratitude. I had learned something valuable. That doubt, unchecked, can twist reality into something unrecognizable. And that trust, even when fragile, is worth protecting. That I looked around the room, at the scattered papers, the quiet house, the late afternoon light filtering in, and realized that the storm had passed. The confrontation, the heartbreak, the obsessive search, it had all led to this one undeniable moment of truth. He hadn't betrayed us. He never would. And somehow, even in my own mistakes, I had gained a deeper understanding of trust, fear, and the human heart. After the truth was revealed, the house felt different, lighter, somehow, though the memories of suspicion still lingered in the corners, like shadows that refused to be completely erased. But for the first time in weeks, I felt a quiet possibility, something I hadn't allowed myself to feel since the first seed of doubt had taken root. Peace. The days that followed were small steps. I didn't just forgive my cousin, I forgave myself. That was harder, in some ways. I had let my fear twist perception, let it cloud judgment, let it strain the bonds of family. But acknowledging that, facing it honestly, was like pulling sunlight into a dark room. I could finally see clearly that we began with conversations, honest, open, and sometimes awkward. I asked him about moments I had misunderstood, and he listened without judgment, without defensiveness. There was no anger, no resentment, only understanding. It was humbling. I realized that trust isn't just about assuming the best in others. It's about giving space for honesty, even when doubts creep in. I remember one evening, sitting in the living room with him, the fading light painting warm streaks across the walls. We didn't talk about the near betrayal, didn't dissect my paranoia. Instead, we laughed about the small absurdities of life, the kind of mundane details that had once felt meaningless. And in that laughter, I felt a bridge being rebuilt. A bridge I hadn't realized had crumbled under my own fears. That a flashback drifted into my mind, soft and comforting. A simpler time, before suspicion had poisoned thought, when he had stayed up helping me fix a car engine, joking and laughing. That memory, once twisted in my mind as a test of trust, now felt like what it truly had been. A gesture of care, unselfish, genuine. And I let it sit there, like a warm stone in my chest, grounding me in reality that I began noticing the small gestures again, but this time without suspicion. The way he made coffee just the way my wife liked it. The way he remembered a detail about my favorite book. The way he checked in, quietly, not to manipulate or pry, but because he cared. Those moments, once misread as subtle deceit, now felt like threads weaving a tapestry of genuine connection. We even revisited some of the spaces where my paranoia had run wild. The study, the documents, the files. Together, we went through everything, not to investigate, not to accuse, but to understand, to ensure clarity. The meticulousness that once made me anxious now felt like collaboration. We laughed about my obsessive note-taking, the imagined trails, the evidence I had built up in my mind. And in that laughter, a sense of release washed over me, like breathing out months of tension I hadn't realized I was holding. Another flashback surfaced, this one bittersweet. I remembered a family vacation years ago, walking on the beach with him, the sun setting in brilliant hues, the sound of waves mixing with laughter. Back then, I hadn't thought much of it, just another happy memory. Now, I saw it as part of a continuum, a reminder that relationships are built slowly, quietly, and sometimes tested unnecessarily by shadows of fear. That memory anchored me, reminding me that trust, once shaken, can be rebuilt, stronger and more resilient than before. That I noticed a change in myself as well. The constant tension, the hypervigilance, the gnawing doubt, all of it started to fade. I felt lighter, more present. I could enjoy moments without fear of hidden motives, without second-guessing every gesture. The freedom was almost dizzying. A heady realization that the human heart can heal, that misunderstandings can be corrected, and that even after fear and suspicion, trust can grow again. One quiet evening, I caught him in the kitchen, pouring a glass of water, humming softly. I paused, watching him, and a small, genuine smile spread across my face. The relief, the joy, the comfort of knowing the truth, it was all there, in the ordinary moments. And I realized that peace doesn't always arrive in grand gestures. Sometimes, it comes quietly, in the spaces between words, in the warmth of shared silence, in the simple knowledge that the person you feared might hurt you has never been a threat at all. That we ended the day together. Sitting on the terrace, the city lights sparkling below, the cool evening breeze brushing past us. No words were necessary. We both understood. The storm had passed, and in its place was clarity, connection, and the quiet joy of restored trust. I felt the weight of paranoia lift entirely, replaced by gratitude, for family, for love, for the lessons learned through fear and doubt. That in those moments, I understood something profound. That trust, once broken or questioned, can be rebuilt. Not instantly, not without effort, but with patience, honesty, and empathy. And that peace, fragile yet powerful, is always worth fighting for. Looking back now, it's almost surreal how quickly a sense of normalcy can fracture, and how slowly it can return. Those weeks of suspicion, tension, and quiet investigation feel like a distant storm, one I survived but will never forget. The emotions are still there, faint echoes in the corridors of memory, but they no longer dominate the present. I often sit quietly in the living room, watching sunlight spill across the polished floors, the hum of the city below blending with the subtle sounds of our home. The air feels lighter now, filled with warmth rather than tension, with laughter, rather than whispered doubts. And sometimes, when I catch a glimpse of my cousin's easy smile, I feel a deep, almost overwhelming sense of gratitude. Not just for him, but for the lessons embedded in the turmoil, for the clarity that emerged from the chaos. I remember vividly the moment I realized how much fear had clouded my judgment. I had been sitting alone one evening, notebook in hand, revisiting every observation, every perceived clue, every imagined slight. And suddenly it hit me. The truth had been there all along. He hadn't done a single thing wrong. Not one act, not one hidden move. And yet, the weight of my own paranoia had turned ordinary gestures into potential betrayals. The revelation was humbling. It was painful, and it was freeing. There's a flashback that often comes to mind, gentle and bittersweet. I think of the First time I truly relied on him. Years ago, during a minor crisis, when he had been there, steady, patient, unwavering. Back then, I had accepted his support without question. Now, reflecting on it, I realized that those small moments of care, repeated over time, had built a foundation of trust that my fear almost demolished. It's a humbling reminder that relationships are resilient, but only if we nurture them carefully, with understanding and empathy. The process of rebuilding trust has been quiet, understated. We don't talk about the paranoia or the obsessive notes or the sleepless nights. Instead, we focus on ordinary life, shared meals, casual jokes, helping one another without expectation. And in these small moments, the bond feels stronger, more genuine, more grounded than ever. I've learned that trust isn't just given. It's proven, continuously, through honesty, patience, and consistency that I catch myself smiling more easily now, laughing more freely. There's a lightness in daily life that was missing before, the kind that comes from understanding, from reconciliation, from realizing that the fear I carried was mine to release. Even my own heart feels different, steadier, calmer, more accepting. The storm may have left faint marks, but it also left clarity, perspective, and resilience. There was one particularly quiet evening that stands out. I was on the terrace, the city lights twinkling below, the air cool and fragrant with the approaching night. My cousin joined me, and we sat in silence for a while, simply watching the world move, feeling it move with us. And in that shared silence, I realized that closure doesn't always require dramatic confrontation or sweeping declarations. Sometimes, it is simply the recognition of peace, the gentle affirmation that the bonds that matter most are intact, and that the mistakes of fear can be acknowledged without destroying what has been built. Another flashback floats into my mind. A family dinner long ago, laughter ringing around the table, warmth and comfort filling every corner. At the time, it was ordinary. But now, in hindsight, I see it as a symbol of what truly matters: trust, care, and the quiet, enduring love that binds us, even when tested. It's a reminder that life's most profound lessons often arrive in the guise of ordinary moments, and that clarity sometimes follows chaos, slowly, imperceptibly, until it is undeniable. That I've also learned something about myself. I've learned that fear can be a powerful teacher, but also a dangerous one. That the mind can twist ordinary gestures into imagined betrayals, that suspicion can consume what should be peace, and that self-reflection is essential for growth. Most importantly, I've learned that forgiveness, both for others and for oneself, is not a single act, but a continuous choice. Now, when I think of those weeks of tension and fear, I do so with gratitude. They were painful, yes, but they were necessary. They forced me to confront my own doubts, to examine the fragile threads of trust that bind us, and to emerge with a deeper understanding of love, family, and human resilience. I see my cousin not just as a family member, but as a testament to patience, integrity, and the quiet strength that can withstand even unfounded suspicion. And as I sit here, watching the sunlight shift across the room, hearing the faint sounds of life around me, I feel a profound sense of closure. The storm has passed, the fear has lifted, the trust has been restored, and in its place, there is peace, a peace that is quiet, steady, and lasting, a peace that carries with it the understanding that even in the darkest moments, clarity and connection can prevail.